but again, there's so many people that have had similar experiences, and me included, where I had a very distinct interaction where I truly felt like I was interacting with my future self. And I've had all of the archetypal interactions with, the gestury figures. I've had it with the mantis insectoid figures. I've had it more with, with the feminine archetypes, like the pretty female energies. And not just throwing out like David Brown's book and all of the interactions, but like I've truly had those type of flavor of interactions. But there was one very distinct one where it was very comforting, that it felt like it was me from a future or different time, and I was coming back to kind of do a diagnostic check on myself. And again, how do you put that into perspective? To me, that was one of the big reasons why I was interested in it as well, was because you can have this amazing psychedelic experience, but if you're using it intentionally for therapy and to try to help yourself, you can have some amazing therapeutic value. And in the course of a day, like I did, where I pushed it 7-8 sessions that first day, I feel like I got years and years and years of therapy in an afternoon.
So Adam Butler, welcome to True Theory Podcast. Greetings from Europe.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. And I love your accent when you say the name of your podcast. It just flows so nicely.
It's my Polish roots, Polish accent. You're originally from the US, right?
Correct. Rhode Island. So it's the smallest state in the country, on the East Coast.
And you have an interesting story, and definitely a topic that I like to talk about a lot, which is psychedelics. And this is something that, I think in your case, it changed your life, right? Use of psychedelics. Can we say something like that?
It completely transformed my life, and I think take it one step further, it saved my life.
And I like to say that psychedelics were also probably the most profound, the experiences I had were some of the biggest in my life. And definitely I feel that they helped me to understand, myself better than anything. And at the same time, I had a lot of programs where I was like going into materialism and things like that, and they helped me to understand what is important, to wake up, to change my life. So maybe not save my life from like some hardcore destructive things, but also helped me with my direction in life. So that's why same as you, I decided to try to educate people about it, because this is a topic that, a lot of people who had no experiences, they have their biased perspective, and it's very programmed that this is just some kind of hallucinations and dangerous drugs and things like that. And you decided to even write a memoir, right, in a way, which is your book that you released 2 years ago something. It's called Butler's DMT Field Guide. And maybe you can tell us, like, in a nutshell, how it happened that you started experimenting with psychedelics and what was going on in your life at that time.
Sure. And we discussed before recording that maybe it may be appropriate to say, a brief disclaimer. And I stopped my book actually with a disclaimer saying, in my opinion, psychedelics definitely helped me, and they truly changed my perspective on damn near everything in my life. But I don't think psychedelics are for everybody. I don't think DMT is definitely not for everybody. And you have a lot of guests on your podcast that come up with a different approach to unlock your inner human potential. Basically, in my opinion, psychedelics are one tool or one key of many to hold a mirror. And you've said a couple words even just in your story about, learning within and looking within and having psychedelics kind of clarify your own internal thoughts. And I want to preface the conversation with that the purpose of what psychedelics allowed me to do was truly take the time to learn myself and then love myself. But there are many other ways, I think, of doing that, whether that's meditation, whether that be through spiritual practices. For some people, it may be religion. But it really is just learning about yourself. So for me, the summary, and you're about my age, and my story seems to resonate with middle-aged men quite a bit, where I had the proverbial, well, I'm 45, so I don't know how close you are to that, but
42.
All right. So, but I had the proverbial midlife crisis where everything in my life over the course of a couple years just completely was destroyed. And I can look back at it and say that it was all due to my own making. I was truly, I was an alcoholic. I was mean. I was narcissistic. I was belligerent. I was a jerk to basically everybody around me. But because I had financial success and I was well off and I had all of the jobs and the titles, I kept kind of sweeping my own problems onto the rug until over the course of a couple of years, it ended with two, long-term relationships that ended horribly, including with a restraining order where I got kicked out of my house. There was I quit my high-paying job that I had for many, many years just because I was stressed. I got another better job, and within a short amount of time, I threatened to kill one of the owners over a $900 discretion, which ended up, being paid off back in my favor. But I was just so burnt out, and all of my strings were so short that I just snapped. And it was at that point that I really needed to take stock of myself and realize what the hell is going on. And I was in a really, mentally ill place. I was dark. I was depressed, and I didn't quite know if I wanted to stay on this planet anymore. And I had turned to psychedelics as almost kind of a last resort. And at this point, I'd been hearing a lot of information about the therapeutic value of shrooms for, the veterans or PTSD. And there was a lot of research going on. And I've never been somebody that took prescription pills. I've never been somebody that really looked for pharmaceutical solutions to my issues. And I thought that starting with shrooms would maybe something that could potentially help. And before I got into DMT, which really was it gave me that epiphany life change. The exploration into psychedelics started with shrooms. And for me, that was really important because it allowed that inner shadow work. It allowed me to hold that proverbial mirror up to myself and look at all of the dark, nasty demons and all of the shit that I needed to confront. And, I say often that it's really easy to lie to your friend, to your girlfriend, to your therapist, but it's impossible to lie to yourself when you're looking in the mirror on 5 grams of shrooms and you've got to take ownership of all of your crap. And that was the first shift of me taking accountability and not looking for external, reasons for all of my internal problems. And then in combination with DMT, in my opinion, what DMT did was give me a very heartfelt, full body realization that all we have is this absolute second, this millisecond, this right now. And I was so caught up in the past and the future, and I was so anxious and stressed out on both of those aspects that I couldn't just be here and be current. And that's what DMT allowed on that transformative day where I pushed it pretty hard with DMT, and I got the answer that I needed.
A couple of things you said. So, I get skeptics a lot because I've been doing lectures on psychedelics over the last 3 years. This is one of the topics that I lecture on at festivals. I go to some festivals, and the topic is like using psychedelics for spiritual growth. And I get people saying that you can achieve everything on psychedelics without psychedelics if you work on yourself and things like that. This is one of the arguments I get. But to be honest, I don't agree because some of my experiences, for example, I felt like you're not able to do anything like that without psychedelics, or I never heard about anyone doing that. And, I've been doing all sorts of practices before psychedelics for like 10 years and stuff like that. And we're talking about like, experiencing other dimensions, densities, getting into like super high states of consciousness where I could see all of reality simultaneously at the same time, like all these like super advanced states. So I don't think you can, achieve everything that you can achieve with psychedelics without psychedelics. But I definitely agree that they're not for everyone, because I don't know, some people are just maybe faint-hearted, whatever, they're gonna get scared with like, and sometimes these sessions are extremely scary, right? Like they're gonna break you. So maybe not for everyone, So it's something that definitely you probably should do with caution, and if you hear the calling and this type of stuff. And I think because I don't have a lot of experience with using or hearing about stories about psychedelics being used for healing some kind of psychological challenges. And I've done a session with a friend, who took mushrooms for the first time, and he had some traumas coming from childhood appearing over the next 2 weeks after the session that almost like got released. But I would be afraid to work with someone, let's say as a guide, who has some serious psychological challenges, because I'm afraid that it can amplify their issues. What do you think about that? Like, do you think psychedelics can be dangerous to help certain people with some kind of mental illnesses or whatever, or there is like some level that you can work with and some level that it's better to not mix these two things together?
Yeah, some some good questions. And at the beginning, you asked a couple questions too. So if I could go back, you said that psychedelics, in your opinion, and my opinion, are unique, and psychedelics do allow exploration of altered states of consciousness in your physical body in a unique class where you really do get to explore the limits of your human potential. And I think maybe psychedelics are unique in that class. I think though that, big picture, what I'm talking about is like I had so much societal plaque built up on me. And I think that's a common trend for a lot of people, whether it just be through work, through social media, through the stresses of just what the world puts on us. And it's so easy to get bogged down and to get into this monotonous routine where in my case it was just drink 10 beers every day and wake up and put bourbon in my coffee, and every interaction with my girlfriends was yelling and screaming, and every time I went out I was yelling at everybody who was driving, I was yelling at everybody in the market, everybody that I interacted with was an asshole. It was just this constant routine of being clouded and bogged down. And for me, psychedelics was that blast that removed all of that plaque. Now, leaning into or learning more about similar stories, I think there are other ways that can happen. You hear people about having like near-death experiences where they come back with a whole new perspective shift on life, where, they know they're more than their physical being, they know that there's some sort of connection to God. Another, common thing is people that have major trauma. You get into a major car accident, or you have your whole family taken away from you. You can have that perspective shift too, where all of that, plaque is removed and now you look at life from a different way. For some people, it may be an interaction with God, with Jesus, with Source, whatever religion somebody may be prone to go towards. So I think there are multiple ways to kind of shake people out of their normal routine. And once you kind of get that shaking and kind of like awakening from just going through that rat race, that's when you can start doing the self-exploration. I do agree with you that psychedelics allow you, once the plaque's removed and once all that crap is gone, psychedelics then allow you to understand how your body truly works to to its fullest potential. And I think that's one of the coolest aspects of my DMT experiences. And specifically, I think there's two classes of interactions. One where you're just kind of going into this DMT space and you're enjoying the show and you've got all these sights and sounds, the vibratory hum, and you're just kind of enjoying it. Then you have the interactions where you're interacting with entities, beings, non-physical, whatever you want to call them. And I've had quite a few interactions with those beings where they kind of take over your body and show you how to breathe properly, how to pulse chemicals through your body properly, how to absorb oxygen, how to listen, how to use your eyes, your ears. So there's a lot of information in these deep psychedelic states that, in my opinion, show truly how awesome the human body is. So I think there's that separation. And then your question, which I think is a really important one, is somebody that's going through mental health issues or has some crap wrong in their life, could psychedelics push them over the edge or have negative effects? And the short answer is yes, absolutely. Typically, these psychedelics are going to amplify and exaggerate a lot of what's going on in your life. Now, in my particular case, especially on shrooms, I needed that. I needed to have those confrontations. I needed to do battle with my demons and my shadowy aspects of myself. I needed to do what most people would run from and say, oh, that was a bad trip, and you come out crying and broken. And I don't, I hesitate to call those bad trips. They're learning opportunities where, again, you're finding the cracks in your psyche that only you know are there, and no one else is going to be able to find them except you. And that's going to be challenging. So are some people not ready to take that? Yes. I mean, ultimately, it took me until 41 years of old to even have the balls to try to confront that. So I know not everybody is going to be ready, or it's going to come at a certain time in their life. But yeah, for the wrong person, it could be challenging for sure.
Yeah, my approach to psychedelics is that I think people who want to go this path, they should do it with caution and put like 1 foot in the water bit by bit. This is what I always recommend. It's better to start and even not have a full-blown experience, but just to see how you react and then be disappointed, than to have a completely, crack this experience, which this is what happened when I had my ayahuasca session, which is only happened once, because I basically had like an ego death, and I felt like I'm in hell, and I started fighting with everyone, on ayahuasca, and there was actually people around, so I was fighting with people, stuff
like physically.
Yeah, and it ended up very seriously, and I was actually I've been doing 25 years of kickboxing. I was vice champion of Poland like 20 years ago, so it was this type of experience where I took it so literally, everything, that I'm locked in hell and stuff like that. That this is what I'm kind of trying to, maybe this is a rare case. But overall, like, some people might react in this way once in a while. Most people probably gonna, have decent experiences. And I also think that so-called bad trips are not really bad trips or whatever. They are more, like you said, to show you something. So basically, like, imagine you have 4 hours, let's say, or a couple of hours if you do like mushrooms or whatever, and you've been having some negative patterns for 20 years of your life, and now these memories fade away very quickly after the session. So if you're gonna face everything very strongly, it's gonna crack you, so you remember what to do. I feel like that's why it's so powerful and profound. So you really, you memorize what happened and stay with it for another period of time, whatever. So you actually start acting and doing changes. That's why they can be so drastic and brutal. What do you think?
Yeah, and you you touched on kind of psychedelics 101, which is set and setting, and what's your intention when you're going into it. So, for anybody that's kind of maybe new or thinking about it, that is incredibly important, and I wouldn't just brush that off. So like every one of my sessions, even when I was in the darkest of mental funks, it was always with respect and reverence for the molecule. It was with the intention, can I learn about myself? What therapeutic value can I pull from this? And I always had, and the environment was important too, where you had the glass of water to drink and the nice bed set up, or whether you want darkness or you want sights, and that's a really important aspect, in my opinion, to having a safe journey and to really being able to explore yourself. But like what happened to you, and what I think is not necessarily a super common issue, but something that I get asked quite a bit, and am I afraid of it personally, which is once you get into these elevated states of consciousness, once you open up your mind and body and your spiritual being to take in more vibratory energy, and sometimes it's sights and sounds, and as you know, sometimes it's telepathic communication, sometimes it feels like it's a DNA download or an activation, or there's all these weird ways of communication that can happen. And if I can sit here and say that if you can elevate your body and have all of these wonderful experiences because you have heightened and more sensitive senses, then could that allow for negative or dark or shitty interactions? And I think you have to be honest with yourself, and the answer is yes. Now, my personal kind of experience and how I navigate not only my walking normal life, but as well as when I'm in that DMT realm, is part of this journey is I've gotten a true sense of myself. I know my weaknesses, I know my strengths. When I do find my weaknesses, I lean into them and I try to grow. And now, after multiple years of these explorations of my truly just the inner workings of myself, I'm very comfortable with who I am and who I am in my skin. And that's not a cockiness or an arrogance, but I walk through the day-to-day world with a good filter for people's energy, for people's vibes, for what I allow in and around me. And that conveys when I'm tripping on shrooms or in the DMT world. And when those darker energies kind of come and try to interact, I think you don't run from them. You lean into it and say, nope, like, you shine the light on the darkness, and knock on wood. Every time I go in, I shouldn't say knock on, like, I don't, I'm very humble. I don't want to act like I've got it all figured out, but I go into these experiences with more curiosity than fear. And I go into it with more knowledge of maybe my power and my ability. And, so far I haven't had anything where I've come out but with anything other than just amazing interactions, even with the ones that sometimes are difficult to hear. But that's what changed my life, and that's what truly altered my path. And maybe one of the arguments I'm sure you get from people is that, are these experiences real, or is it just your mind making up stuff, or is it just you hallucinating? Well, possibly, and I'm not sitting here saying I have all of the answers, but what I can say is that the effects that happened to me in my life are real. And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people where they can say the experiences, the lessons learned, the information conveyed in those psychedelic spaces, they took back to their normal life, and it completely changed the way they live. So I don't know, that's real to me. Like that, the effects are real. It changes people's lives.
Yeah, I think the tool, the effects, which can vary. They can be healing, can be just gaining knowledge about yourself or nature of reality, all sorts of things like that. But when it gets to this question, which is a common question, are the beings, for example, real or just some kind of archetypes or hallucinations? I can give you some examples that, in my view, prove that they're real. So at least some of them, or whatever, like, for example, I had this session 3 years ago, something. Basically, it was on mushrooms. I was in the mountains with my cousin. And throughout the whole session, maybe like 3 to 4 hours, there was one female humanoid figure who was like, older woman, very wise, very loving. She was communicating with me telepathically, and basically I think she's one of my spirit guides or something like that, because she knew a lot of details about me and she was showing me things. So like personal things, relationships. She was answering questions that I had prepared in advance. Like, let's say I was thinking about if eating eggs is bad, let's say, as a vegan vegetarian, I was oscillating between veganism and vegetarianism. So one of the thoughts I had, what about eating eggs? And I didn't even think about anything like that during the session. That was something I was thinking about before, like a few days earlier. And in the session, she showed me a plant, basically, which was just a green plant. And in a vision, if you would slice it in half with a sword or something, and the plant started bleeding with the red blood. And then she said, like, you see, plants are alive like you and me, but you have to eat something. So, just do it with balance and things like that, So it's like a lot of really interesting insights I was getting from her. And towards the end of the session, I was really blown away with the whole experience. So throughout it was summer, very hot, mountains, we were dehydrated, things like that. My cousin was overweight and I dragged him for a hike, so he was like completely dehydrated, things like that. And once it was fading, at the moment, it was fading, my cousin says, you know what, I think you gotta leave me here, go downstairs, which is like 1 hour hike or something, and get some water, because turned out that I drank all water during the session because I was so overwhelmed. So I was just grabbing bottle, throwing it on the ground, and he's telling me that he's fading, basically, like he gonna lose conscience soon because he's so dehydrated. And the moment he said that, I'm getting this download, a vision. Remember about the dream you had like 2-3 days before. So 2-3 days before the session, I had a dream. And in the dream, I was shown that we're going to split during the session. And that basically, he going to lose himself somewhere in the forest. Like, we're not going to find each other, right? So I was warned before the session what's going to be the outcome before it even happened, right? Before anything. Everything was kind of picking random stuff, like, oh, this mountain, we're going to go here. But someone knew already that, he going to get dehydrated. He going to be so weak that we're going to decide
You're all going to drink
split.
all the water.
So, but this is like really, and what we decided to do, we just had breath work exercise for a couple of minutes. He started feeling better, and then we walked back to the hotel, and we basically lost ourselves in the woods anyway, but we didn't get back properly. But this is kind of interesting that before the session, I was warned already about the outcome. And I think this is an example that, the woman was not just my mind or whatever, like she probably communicated beforehand. And another similar example, right? So these beings can interact in dreams or in psychedelic states as well. And, Aubrey Marcus, right? I'm sure you're familiar. So he was telling this story where he had a dream of some demon, like some kind of demonic figure, just telling him something like, oh, you're going to die on this date or whatever, something like this. I don't remember the details, right? He woke up, checked his calendar. That was like 2 months later or whatever, the date. And that was the date where he was actually in South America on some ayahuasca ceremony or something, supposed to go, right? So the demon gave him the date which was two months later, and that was exactly where he was going on a trip to South America. And once the trip, approached and happened, like he was meditating, ayahuasca was kicking in, and this little demon showed up and started biting his neck. And he was like projecting some stuff from his heart chakra to protect himself. And he said the demon came, bite into the heart, and boom, like he got shot, like just like almost like felt like died. And suddenly the big demon, the one from the dream, showed up and started conversation with him and wanted to have some like deals with him to, things like that. But basically, how is that possible that you get the entity from a psychedelic session appearing in your dream before, giving you dates and things like that, So what do you think?
And you had David Brown on. You did a good interview with him. So he's, he just wrote that book about DMT entities, and so he, outlines a lot of these commonalities. And so I think a couple of things are going on there. I've also had interactions with multiple non-physical entities, whether they be in dream states, whether they be in psychedelic states, and honestly, even sometimes in normal everyday life. And how I explain it, or how I try to rationalize it, is that we have way more than our normal 5 human senses. So, and just as a matter of survival, we can't take in all the information around us. We kind of have to limit what we can take in. And there are multiple ways to turn our normal 5 senses up. If say that the maximum dial is 10, there's multiple ways of turning that dial up to 100 or 1,000, or keep going. But then there's also other senses that I think you can add on, and I don't know the answers to, or what to call them, so to speak. But there are multiple ways of getting your body to be more sensitive to its environment, to take in more information and more vibration that's around you. And I think it's just a simple state that we can have access to, whether they be spirits, ghosts, aliens, DMT entities, whatever words you want to use to describe these non-physical beings. I think they're there. They're always there. And our interaction with them happens when we can elevate and alter our consciousness to dial into their frequency. Similar to changing a dial on a TV or a stereo, or, where we just have to elevate in our level of vibrating to match theirs. And, I think it's the stories are too similar. And, you brought this up about DMTX and trying to go into the DMT world for extended periods of time, so you can kind of figure out what these entities are, or try to map the world or that you see there. And that implies that they are freestanding external beings outside of our consciousness. And my experience is that is true, above and beyond and different from all the voices in my head and all of the different aspects of my psyche, and talking about, doing my shadow work and having conversations with the dark aspects of myself as well as the light aspects of myself. And it's a very different feeling. It's a very different knowing than, hey, is this just some aspect of myself, or is it, like you had, an experience in the woods that seemed to be outside of you, that wasn't just a voice in your head. So how to explain it, I'm not sure. But does it happen, and does it happen quite often? And I think, are there ways of being hypersensitive to that, again, it doesn't have to be psychedelics. If you are able to quiet your mind and get into a deep meditative state and go off into the woods, and I do it often, you can start connecting with all sorts of weird energies. It's there. It's just, like I said, turning your antenna on.
I asked during one of the sessions I asked about my ex, who is my twin flame. She's psychic, so she can see these entities without any psychedelics, and she's actually quite against it. But anyway, like, she's been telling me these stories about seeing ghosts or all sorts of entities. And I asked one time, and I absolutely believe her. I spent a lot of time with her, so I could see it in action, and it was the right main times. But one time during the session on mushrooms, I asked about, can I see things the way she sees things? Can I have the same kind of senses as she has? And what I was shown was basically like a CGI animation of an eye. And if you would separate different parts of an eye to kind of show you graphics or something, and show that she has a greater spectrum of colors, whatever, like she basically, her senses are more developed. So maybe like ability to see through the electromagnetic spectrum is just greater, whatever. And when I had some of the experiences, sometimes I could see colors that we don't have here. Like, so, my understanding is that when you have these higher dimensions, whatever, densities, some people call them densities, which are where, some of these beings live, or they're occupied by them. Basically, these are like higher levels of consciousness. Senses are more developed in these realms. That's why they can interact with you, or they see you, they know you, but you don't know them, because your senses here are still lower level, right? They're already behind that level, so their spectrum is wider. That's why, you see other colors there, you see more. The vision is often different. It's not 3D or whatever, because it's basically just higher states. So currently, your antenna is a little bit limited with the wavelength, whatever. On higher levels, like, it's higher, and maybe that's what it does. It just helps you to tune into that, the antenna, puts spectrum wider or whatever. I don't know. This is kind of what I think.
And I think an easy way of looking at that, how that can actually be explained in the world, think about just animal senses. So there's plenty of, dogs can smell so much better than we can. How many animals have better eyesight than we do? So to have a biological being on this planet interacting with vibratory energy more refined than us, it happens all the time. So, I'm not saying that we would necessarily take on animal senses, but to think that the 5 human senses that we have are the only way to interact with the environment around us is false. That there's many other ways, and there's some really cool studies that prove that. Like, even in the U.S., there's a new podcast that's been out for over a year now called the Telepathy Tapes, where it's all about non-verbal autistic children and how they can communicate, non-verbally with not only themselves over long distances, but with their parents and their teachers. And the lady that does the podcast does a really, really good job of basically just sharing their story, not trying to sensationalize it, not trying to, say anything that's not true, really just giving these nonverbal kids a voice finally. And it's amazing once you look into it, what that human body is capable of doing. And then, there are people that are good at remote viewing, and some people will say bullshit that you can't do that. Well, I really believe you can. I went to Monroe Institute. I've studied their programs. I've met like Joe McGonigal. He's the remote viewer #1. I sat with that guy for several hours and listened to his stories. It's real, and there's many cases of humans just being able to elevate their consciousness, in which case, like I said, newer and greater information can come in. And that's what I'm really excited about. It's not psychedelics or DMT. It's, to tie back to what we started the conversation on, which is, how do we unlock the human potential? And again, this seems to be a theme of a lot of your guests, which is, and a lot of people have a different way of wording it. So are you unlocking DNA? Are you having some sort of download? Are you, and again, I don't have the answers to it. What I know happened to me was basically an almost instantaneous change and shift in how my body worked, how I interacted with the world, and having control over the physiology of all of, I don't know, like, not to be anxious, not to be stressed, not to be just all pent up, and just the opposite, to be calm, to be happy, to be content. And when you hear people like you talk, and a lot of your guests that have kind of removed that plaque. It seems to be a very common sparkle in their eye, so to speak, where no one's saying they've got it all figured out, but they know what doesn't work. They know it's not materialism. They know it's not just, working a 9 to 5 and trying to get more shit. It's not alcohol. It's not pharmaceutical drugs. And it's not any of the crap that a lot of people just do on a day-to-day basis. It's looking within. It's taking the time for yourself. It's taking that long walk in the woods, and whatever happens to your physical body and your mental and spiritual body, really, when you do that, it unlocks and unleashes something. Some people call it a Kundalini awakening. Some people call it being and again, it's all a different way to try to describe just a palpable transformation in yourself. And once you have it, you have it.
I heard this story. I don't know if this is true, but I think someone was saying that Joe Rogan was sharing an experience where he disappeared on DMT and he felt like he was there for whatever 1 year or something. Like, I'm not 100% sure if this story is true. But one guy was saying this, that apparently he got teleported into some world with some beings, and he was like living with them for a whole year, and having lunches with them, whatever, and came back and it was just 5 minutes or something, here. I don't know. Do you know anything about this type of experience where the time changes so much that, you feel like you're there for like 1 year or 10 years or whatever, and you come back, it's 5 minutes?
I've never had a situation where like I felt trapped or couldn't get out, or I lived an entire lifetime like that. So I've never had anything, and I've heard stories of people on like salvia having similar, experiences. But there is an understanding that time is malleable. That time is, you can manipulate it. In my opinion, when you're in that DMT world, that the past and the future aren't, I don't think it's a linear progression. I think there are ways of jumping back and forth through those. And I know a lot of the things we say make kind of sound outlandish and sound crazy, and that's certainly one of them. But again, there's so many people that have had similar experiences, and me included, where I had a very distinct interaction on one of my DMT sessions where I truly felt like I was interacting with my future self. And I've had all of the archetypal interactions with, the gestury figures. I've had it with the mantis insectoid figures. I've had it more, with the feminine archetypes, like the pretty female energies, and not just thrown out like David Brown's book and all of the interactions, but like I've truly had those type of flavor of interactions. But there was one very distinct one where it was very comforting, that it felt like it was me from a future or different time, and I was coming back to kind of do a diagnostic check on myself. And again, how do you put that into perspective? It was very calming. It made me relaxed, and I had this prior to that experience, but it confirmed it and made it even more real. Was that a true lack of fear of death? Like I have no fear of dying. I have no fear of death at all, and it's because I've interacted with, again, what I've considered my future energy. And now, again, for the naysayer that says, "Oh man, this guy's just losing it," and all of these, what he's coming back from is false, and it's just his brain. If I can live my life without fearing death, like that's a very helpful thing for most people. And if I can be happy in my own skin, if all of the things that psychedelics allowed me, including lack of fear of death, that stuck, and that experience was real for me, and it allowed for real change. But that was a kind of long-winded answer to what does time happen like that. But
when you had this experience, with your future self, how did it look like? Did you see yourself, or was it just like you had feeling that you're speaking with yourself?
Correct. Yeah, it wasn't me, older with a longer beard, or even it wasn't even me as a different human. It was just a very recognizable, comfortable energy, and I think that's a good way to describe the interaction with these entities, or so when people say like machine elves or jesters, it's more just the flavor in the interaction. So they're typically welcoming. Normally they're smaller, they're happy, they're bubbly, they're light. when people are talking about like insectoid beings, it's more just that they're larger, they're shaped in weird ways. So it's not necessarily that everybody's seeing the same exact being. But there really does seem to be some similarities of the groups of entities. So I guess to answer, this wasn't any of those. This wasn't any of those other like wise old teacher archetype, or some. It was really just it was me. It was such a welcoming, like, calming energy of, this is your soul coming into whatever. Just let you know it's okay.
Yeah, I had experiences with my higher self. I don't know if you know the term higher self, but in a way, like they say, the higher self is like you from very far future. In a way, this is like the most advanced version of yourself, where you are, let's say, like source, but still personality. So this is like late 7th density, 8th density. We just entered 4th density, so like billions of years ahead or whatever. And in a way, what happens, so I had it a couple of times. I remember very little from it always, but it's almost like, same way, like think about, you have your lower self in the dream. Let's say you go to sleep and you project yourself into that body in the dream, and your body sleeps now, so the consciousness is not in the main body in a way, but suddenly it's in the dream world, in that avatar in the dream world. The same happens level up. So the higher self is dreaming your life now, but everything it happens, the whole reality happens in the mind of the higher self, or like collective dream of all higher selves or something like that, right? So it was like I had this experience where it's almost like I woke up in that bigger version of myself for a second, or a couple of moments, and all of reality here seemed to be happening in my mind there. Life on Earth. So first time it happened, I was 33, 10 years ago. It seemed like 3 hours passed into my life, Then I came back to this state maybe 2 years later, 5 years later, and it seemed like whatever 10 minutes has passed or 1 hour has passed over there, So the perception of time is like, for the higher self, 80 years, let's say on Earth, is 8 hours. It's like 1 day of your life, or one dream, saying a little bit like in the dream. Like in the dream, the time is very distorted, right? Maybe you don't know. When you're dreaming, it takes forever, whatever. You woke up and it was just 2 hours or something, right? So it's a little bit like that, but way, way more, because the differences are huge. So it was kind of like this type of experience where, in a way, I was my future self. I don't know how you're going to call it.
I know it's weird to try to describe it.
But I'm also hearing stories where people think that, like recently, for example, I was speaking with a friend, and she told me she had this experience one day. She was laying at the festival, and basically she saw herself as a granny, being old, like 50 years later, whatever, and having her life, accomplished, kids, being proud and everything. And she knew that was her, right? Because that's kind of like what she's worrying about. If her life is going to turn in a good way, she's going to have family, kids, whatever. And suddenly, like, she had this vision of seeing that situation where it's all good. So it makes me think that...
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it was,
But now, if that was just, she had a momentary lapse of consciousness, or whatever, maybe she drank too much coffee that morning. Somebody could say, for whatever reason, she had that vision. But if that comforted her, if that allowed her to not stress and be all pent up about what her future is going to look like if that short vision allowed her to take a step back and live her day in a different way, that's again, that's where the real power of these visions or experiences can happen. So I push back a lot when people say that the experiences are fake or the visions are fake or they're not real. Whatever caused the vision is up for maybe dispute or conversation, but the actual results of that on the person are real. And
Yeah,
one thing as we talk about DMT, and one of the reasons why I wrote the book was many people may not be aware of DMT and what some of its attributes, and a lot of psychedelics take hours and hours and hours. So we talked, on shrooms or LSD, it could be 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 hours. Ayahuasca can be, excuse me, even longer. A normal, and the main ingredient in ayahuasca is DMT. When I talk about my sessions, it's smoking it, and that session takes 7, 8 minutes when
but
you're
this
in
is, sorry, 5-MeO DMT or regular DMT?
Regular NN DMT, and the 5-MeO is a completely different animal. I haven't done that yet. It's kind of in the works, hopefully, to explore that molecule as well. But that is a good clarification. So, ayahuasca is typically 2 ingredients, and one is the DMT. And again, that can last. You're drinking that, you're consuming that, and that's hours and hours. When you're smoking NN DMT, that experience is 7, 8 minutes, 10 minutes tops. And to me, that was one of the big reasons why I was interested in it as well, was because you can have this amazing psychedelic experience, but if you're using it intentionally for therapy and to try to, help yourself, you can have some amazing therapeutic value in the course of a day, like I did, where I pushed it 7, 8 sessions that first day. I feel like I got years and years and years of therapy in an afternoon, because you can go deep into this DMT space, come back and integrate it, and then kind of push it again. And you don't have to wait a weekend or to the next trip to Peru or, and I don't know, kind of going off on tangents here, but one of the other aspects, as we're talking about the quick duration of DMT and how there's multiple keys to unlock this potential. Another big aspect of DMT, if people aren't aware of it, is that it is endogenous, and that means that it is produced naturally in your own body. And that was another reason why I was attracted to it initially. So just like with shrooms, natural and organic, and comes from the earth, DMT is extracted from natural plants and is in a bunch of different plants, but it's also produced naturally in our own body. So when we talk about having deep meditation or lucid dreams or having a connection to God or to source, some of that potentially could be equated with or answered by just our own body pulsing on natural DMT. So it's a really unique molecule that is different from basically all other psychedelics, because we, like I said, we produce it naturally, we metabolize it naturally, and that's why it removes the veil. It doesn't drug up and add a bunch of stuff. It just makes the human more human.
I think Rick Strassman, I actually talked to him. We didn't do the interview because we were talking about the topics, but we had a call, and he was saying something that he believes, or whatever, is a theory now, that maybe all organisms have certain levels of DMT, same like we have serotonin, some other neurotransmitters. And the purpose of that is so your senses can tune into this version of reality. That's why every organism has that level, some kind of stable levels. But once it's activated, once you have more of it going through your system, the senses are suddenly opening to a greater reality that is all around us, exists. And it's just that, it's basically like some kind of keeping us at this level, but the levels are way greater around us. It's kind of interesting. It's also interesting how it connects with the third eye, which is a topic known for millennia, like in ancient Egypt or all sorts of ancient cultures. And you know, I wanted to share also like some of my kind of setup that I used, which I think was interesting. Maybe it's gonna be useful for you one day or whatever. But before I get into psychedelics, I was already doing a lot of work on myself before, right? So what I think happened was that, if you think about it, like, let's say you go to a ayahuasca retreat, they tell you that you got to eat certain diet for like 2 weeks or whatever, just to kind of prepare the body, right? But what happens when you do these substances is that you stimulate the flow or release of these chemicals like DMT, right? But you have certain exercises that can already open the flow, like Qigong, for example, Qigong, or Kundalini yoga and things like that, right? So you're in a way, or breath work, like some kind of Wim Hof breathing, whatever. And this is what I've been doing already for many years before, right? So I started like Qigong 2006. For 3 years, I was experimenting with these types of practices. Then I had my Kundalini awakening, which opened my energetic body more. I became more sensitive. And then I got into grounding meditations, which are basically like you try to visualize that you connect with like the universe, sending energy through the whole body to the ground, right? And I was doing that for a couple of years already, right? And then psychedelics came. So only like 10 years later. And straight away, I had these experiences where I was getting into that level of higher self, all these things. And I'm talking to people and they say, oh, wow, you had, really cool experiences. I was like jumping through all the 12 levels of density, like reviewing whole universe and things like that. So everyone was like, wow, But I was wondering why, I had these experiences straight away, just like whatever I wanted, I was doing. And people say, sometimes I don't get visions, whatever. And I thought there was a combination of these things. So first, because I worked on these aspects, that's why once you had the substance, it was just amplifying everything, Mm-hmm. I also had connection with my higher self because I started working with my higher self through prayers and experience already way before. So that was another thing. Then what I've noticed also, some of the most profound experiences were always when I was on the mountain, right? Because I was wondering why, I had this big experience where I like jump into that high level, see everything from there. I thought maybe, the dose, maybe it's like the nature, maybe whatever. When I experimented in different settings, so let's say in the apartment, in the flat forest, or on the hill, I noticed that when I was in the mountains, I had these biggest experiences every time. And how they say that, in Himalayas, the monks meditate, wherever there are some holy mountains where they go and do the pilgrimages and pray, whatever, right? I think that mountains have some kind of energies that can amplify experience. And if you do the session on top of a mountain, let's say like, doesn't have to be massive, but whatever, that can amplify the experiences many folds. So it was a combination of a lot of these things, working with the higher self, preparing my body for many years, and then being in these right settings like the mountains, and things like that. I think that this really can change a lot about what type of experience people have. And then obviously the rest, like the dose, the type of psychedelic, or all the other things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences where, I intuitively try to seek out running water. Like I feel like I've had some of the most profound meditations by a river or by the ocean, or, same thing on the top of a mountaintop. Now, is it just because you're high above, or is it, is it the composition of the mountain and there's a lot of, crystals in there that are vibrating with you? Again, I don't have all of the answers, but to know that it feels good and that seems to work. So you kind of lean into it, and it sounds like that's what you're doing and that's what I'm doing. And I would really compliment you, though, as you're saying about how you got into this, because I think it's really important that the whole purpose of this journey is the inner work, is the self-knowledge, is that you've got to take hours and hours and hours to go within. And it's not going to happen, that deep work and that deep knowledge. And, like I talked about, I had that epiphany change in a day, in an instant, and I did. But now it's 3 years of integrating that moment. It's 3 years of learning. It's 3 years of adjusting and changing things. So, the fact that you knew or even started your journey into psychedelics with taking time for yourself first, that's the first step in all of this, whether it be expansion, like trying to expand your consciousness and just elevated states of consciousness, or in my case, trying to help mental health or depression or anxiety issues. It's just knowing that you're worth it, that the time and energy you put into yourself is going to be well worth the reward. And to your point, the psychedelics are only going to amplify and accentuate what you're able to already know. So if you can sit there calmly and get an energetic ball and manipulate it because you've been studying that for 3 years, or you can truly feel like you felt the swirling of your internal energies going through your third eye. Like, once you're on shrooms, man, that experience is just going to be so much greater, as opposed to the person that's sitting there who hasn't explored any of that. And they're just sitting there being like, oh, I'm just this dumb meat suit. I'm not going to be able to do anything. This is stupid. Like, going into shrooms with that mindset isn't going to be all that good.
Yeah, I think the naysayers, people who are skeptical, typically when I meet these people, and it's funny because I tend to meet them in spiritual circles. So I tend to, like, I'm interested in spirituality, let's say. So I always meet people who are like really against psychedelics, but when I talk to them, most of them never tried psychedelics. So this is always, for me, it's funny because like I cannot explain to you these states because they're way different to anything you experience. It's like, that highest state that I had is like, imagine you are a bacteria all your life and suddenly you became a human for a moment and you come back to being a bacteria and you try to explain to other bacteria what it is like to be a human, so you're not going to get it until you're going to experience it. And in a way, what I think about it is like, oh yeah, you can achieve these states without psychedelics, whatever. It's like, yeah, I can go to Africa without an airplane, right? It's gonna take me 3 months. Maybe I'm gonna get there, but I can go there in 5 hours, whatever, something like that. So
can I ask you a question though, and maybe on top of what you were saying? So now that before your psychedelics, you started these inner journeys where you were praying, meditating, kind of going within. But now, with the experience with psychedelics, do you find that you can kind of get to that elevated state without psychedelic? Like, I mean, if you were out in the woods, and not a full-blown trip where you're, seeing entities, but I found that with those two practices combined, like, I can almost get into a psychedelic state in this deep meditation hum almost instantly, because I've experienced both. Like, I've experienced deep meditation. I've experienced what happens when I'm in a DMT state or elevated psychedelic state, and I can kind of anticipate what that feels like and induce it. Really, so my non-psychedelic meditations now are almost always psychedelic. Like, when I go to bed at night and I'm shutting my eyes, the fireworks and the shit that I see every night when I try to shut my brain down is almost like a psychedelic trip. It's beautiful.
It activated your third eye and it just stayed activated, whatever. I don't know. For me now, these are quite different. Psychedelics were very different, but I stopped doing psychedelics 3 years ago because I had a very, very negative experience. And it really kind of made me want to take a break. And this is not to scare people as well, because I feel like it's just that my experience is like I had some of the most incredible insights on psychedelics, like I told you, like experiencing different densities, dimensions, past lives, asking questions about science, whatever, getting answers like this, anything I wanted almost. But I feel like what happens when you start doing these types of trips is that it's like when you throw a dice, like, sir, if you gonna throw a dice many times, at some point you're gonna get same number of ones and same number of six, whatever, or seven. Did you have anything like that you had like great experiences and then really negative also? Like, you're not gonna have these uplifting, amazing experiences all the time. And yeah.
No, so, and I think it's important, and I'd like to, hear more about what you learned in that last session that kind of told you to hang it up. Just all I can say is from my personal experience, I haven't taken LSD or ketamine or anything. Really, the two molecules that I use are psilocybin mushrooms and DMT, and I guess the feelings and sensations with those particular ones for me have always really been beneficial and positive. Not to say that I don't know that I couldn't or wouldn't have a bad trip, or I've heard some really, you have a 12-hour LSD session that goes south and then you've got to wait it out for 8 hours. I can imagine how that would all, you probably wouldn't want to touch that again, where with the DMT it really is 7-8 minutes and then you come back. So it's never really been as mind-blowing. I haven't been scared by it yet. Not to say that won't happen, but
yeah.
So did you get like a message from an entity to say back off or don't come, you're not welcome here?
I'm not sure if you want to even like whenever I say it, like people say they got scared and they don't want to do psychedelics.
Well, yeah, but and that's an important part of the story too. And I'm not forcing you to tell any personal stories, but as much as this is my like 50-something interview, and it's typically all about the positive attributes of psychedelics.
Yeah.
But that's why I always preface it with a disclaimer that it's not for everybody. That don't, these are really powerful molecules, and if you lose sight of that, so I think it's important to hear the other side of it as well, because it's not all just cherries and sprinkles.
I think it also can help people maybe if they ever gonna have similar situations. So,
and I'm actually trip setting at an event 2 weeks from now where I'm going to be in the tent to kind of, if anybody has a bad trip, to kind of be a safe space for them. So this is important for me to hear because I may come across something similar.
So during my sessions, I would really go deep into learning about my past lives, let's say. And I learned that I had some really dark past lives sometimes, like we're talking about being in these species, like reptilian species, all these. I would see myself in those bodies. I would be shown scenes, like it's not just me, my cousin had the same, like whole groups, my dad, things like that. And what was happening was that these beings would consider me a traitor in a way. I had discussions with them about it. So I had a lot of attacks during sessions, and these types of things. And then what started going on, I started exposing a lot of this stuff. So a little bit like what David Icke is doing. David Icke?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like started doing a little bit of something like that. And I went on a kind of pretty big podcast in Poland week before the session, where I was like going in detail about this stuff, like really going into like Luciferianism and things like that, And then I was playing this session already a couple of weeks before, and I found out that the session is exactly after lunar eclipse. It was like some red moon eclipse, whatever. I didn't even know. But eclipses are really bad for sessions. I can tell you that. So what happened? Just like the main thing, that Lucifer showed up and tried to, like, first thing before I even entered the forest, my cousin was like, the car was passing by and it's like, oh look, 666 on the plate, like, and a couple of days before I made a video on YouTube about like how the dark side is taking over people, blah blah blah, and he showed up and tried to take me over, for 2 hours, and I had attacks, all sorts of attacks, which normally would, like, I would just raise my, like, start laughing, just breathing slower, whatever, just raise my vibrations, whatever, and they would fade away after a couple of minutes, right? And this one was going 2 hours non-stop, like everything shut down. So I was just feeling the presence and just like this dark energy take me over. And, when I close my eyes, normally I have my third eye vision, so I see everything. It's just completely black. And I know, who I'm dealing with, because I feel the energy of the beings that I'm interacting. So, and it was happening after I started like swearing at them. Like I said, you can't do shit to me. Like, and because I had some smaller attacks before, and I was like, fuck off, la la la, and then boom. And I try to figure out what can I do. Like I'm jumping, like pouring water on myself, like trying to hug trees. Like I don't feel anything. I cannot stay grounded, and I just feel like as this black thing is just taking me over. And my cousin who was with me, like I'm telling him, like, you gotta try to help me. Sometimes we had these situations where I was being attacked, and he was just like, trying to raise also energy, like send white light, whatever, like do something to just increase the frequency. So what came to my mind was that I started doing breath work through my nose. Like it's like a breath of fire, it's called. So you do something like this. Right? You breathe through the nose, breathe out intensely. And what happens is that, the prana, you absorb prana when you breathe, and especially through the nose. And these types of breath work exercises, I've been doing them for many years, and I feel my prana, auric field, chakras. I'm sensitive. I had Kundalini awakening, so I feel the differences. I know how it works. And what really happens is that the entity, your auric field, right? You have a bubble protecting you from anything like that, right?
I agree with that.
So, when you have and you raise your frequency, you smile, you are happy, you meditate, whatever, this gets stronger. The protection, the field is getting stronger, and it's harder for any negative entity to kind of do anything, right? But, this was like 1,000 times more powerful than anything I experienced before, right? So it was just nonstop for 2 hours. So when I was doing the breathing exercise, well, what happens, I get a lot of prana into my system, like, many times more per minute than normally. And that strengthens the auric field, right? Because the auric field is like your immune system. It protects you. So I was just doing that nonstop for 2 hours, like this. And after every few minutes, I would feel that I got kicked out from just disappeared for a second, like released, and then again, and it's like that for 2 hours. So I was just like going nonstop, like, and and again, After that, so like I felt like I'm fighting for my life. I was just like saying, no, you're not gonna take me, whatever, non-stop. After the session, I managed to hold them for 2 hours basically. Couple of months later, Halloween, he showed up in a dream. And it was like, in the dream I was supposed to accept him, hacked the dream, and it seemed very natural. I woke up, fortunately. Then I had a situation a couple of months later when I suddenly got ill. My cousin got ill at the same time. And I had a full-blown attack for 2 weeks with no psychedelics whatsoever, feeling like on psychedelics. So it started continuing after the session. But, what started happening, I started learning a lot about techniques to protect myself. And this, in a way, was one of the things that basically draw me towards sessions, which I'm doing now. So I learned a method which basically helps to release entities, release all sorts of energies, implants, things like that. I've been trained in a unique form of regression therapy, hypnotherapy that works with these types of things. So in a way, like these experiences kind of directed me towards learning some systems and techniques that help me to deal with this stuff, and it really became almost like my path now, because I've trained in this technique this year, so I've done courses for this regressive hypnotherapy technique, and we release a lot of the stuff there. So I'm just basically, you work with second person, right? So like you work with the psychic. Let's say we check what's going on with your energetic body, right? The psychic is like a remote viewer. It's kind of like that, right? They scan your field, they can tap into situations from the past. Maybe you had some encounter, maybe you started something, you had some kind of entities, whatever, and we can try to see what's going on there, if they attached anything, if you have any attachments, things like that. So these experiences just, kind of push me towards this path, which in a way, I think it was useful overall. Like when I look at the whole spectrum of these experiences, from positive to negative ones, I felt like everything was useful in a way, even though it was at that time when it was happening, I felt like I'm fighting for my life,
Yeah, but no, like what an important badge that you've earned, or like, for you to come out of that experience, being able to share that story to help others. I know it must have been difficult to go through, but you just went through something that I really think can help a lot of people. And if I may, not just people that potentially are worried about psychedelics, what you just discussed has been a topic of conversation that several other podcasts that I've been listening to that have nothing to do with psychedelics have been bringing up. So there's a psychiatry or psychologist program called IFS, like Internal Family Systems, here in the U.S. It's really big, where basically they separate the different aspects of yourself in the different parts of your psyche, and everybody has different aspects of their ego. And as a therapist, they sit down with people and they try to let every part of that person have their voice, and try to figure out what the hell's going on with people. There's been like people that have been studying this clinically for 20-25 years, and they're finally coming out now saying that there seems to be a very distinct issue of possession, demonic possession, basically something like an external attachment that can attach to someone's psyche. So it's not, I think, far out there for us to talk about, oh, you're going to the psychedelic state and you may have, get yourself hypersensitive. This is something that's actually being talked about in medical fields like I said, in a non-psychedelic state, because with these doctors are really trying to help individuals, and it's more than just whatever the crazy person that had a psychotic breakdown. And I'm not just brushing that off, but there's clinical ways of saying, all right, they had a psychotic breakdown, or they're having this mental issue or this mental issue. But there's been several of them that they really can't explain other than an outside something trying to attach to themselves. So, I just want I share that story because I believe with what you're saying, and I'm not, just saying, oh, that doesn't happen or that can't happen. And I think when you're hyped, or highly sensitized, like in a psychedelic state, it allows that to attach that much more easily, I guess.
Yeah, I think, you're in a state in between two worlds, right? A little bit open, too much. So sometimes what happens, people have operations. Let's say my friend he was telling me that suddenly his spine started clicking on ayahuasca, and it's almost like someone was aligning his spine, And during that session that I was just describing before, I had my throat chakra enlarged during that session. I saw my throat chakra, and someone just took it like this, like make it bigger. And before I had some issues with like pronunciation and things like that. I'm dyslexic, so I always had problems with speaking. And it was just like someone did it like this, I saw an implant on my back, and I had an operation done during that session. I saw like someone just doing some on my bags, like some technology, things like that. And so what happens is that you're in this state where you're very open, right? And that means for good or for bad, for good, which means like some of these good beings, positive entities, can help you, can maybe heal you, can remove some health problems, whatever, fix some things. But, also in a negative way as well. That's why if you see shamans in South America, they always have like some rituals to protect from evil spirits, whatever, like doing circles, smudging the place, whatever, right? So I think there is this type of stuff. Overall, I feel like it's not that often that happens. And to be honest, I trust way more like something what you've been doing. So let's say, you're doing your own sessions, right? You've been doing on your own, right?
Correct, yeah.
I trust way more than going to Peru and experimenting with ayahuasca sessions with unknown shamans, because a lot of these guys, I think they work with negative beings.
And you're absorbing all the other people. If you're sitting there with a session of 12 people and they're all there trying to release all of their demons, so to speak, you're in a very dangerous energetic space if everybody's hypersensitive and purging all of their stuff. So my typical session is in my room by myself, or potentially my girlfriend, and and it always comes with a deep meditation, deep prayer, and there's been quite a few times when you plan on doing it and for whatever reason it just feels off, or like the train left the station, so to speak, or for some reason it just didn't feel on. And then there's been days too where I wasn't planning on doing it at all, and somehow you're getting a calling being like, you got to go into the space tonight because there's a lesson for you. So I think really just follow your gut feeling and intuition on that. But yeah, no, I've never been to a communal psychedelic session, nor do I think I would really want to.
Yeah, and what I mentioned is not to scare people. It's rare, very rare. These are my experiences. I've had like really full spectrum of like really crazy positive ones, crazy negative ones as well. But I think most people shouldn't be afraid. This is super rare. Anything like that can happen. So it's just to say that people shouldn't be scared of these stories, and that shouldn't prevent you if you feel the calling. You mentioned also Monroe Institute. So I listened to a podcast before when you said you went for some kind of retreat, right, to Monroe Institute. Can you For people who maybe don't know anything about it, can you tell us a little bit more about it?
So there was a gentleman named Robert Monroe that, um, this was probably 40, 50 years ago. He had an out of body experience where, and he writes about it in several books, where he basically woke up one night and he was floating like above his bed, looking down at his wife, and he was kind of pissed because there was another man like sleeping with his wife, but it was him. It was him looking down at his own body, and that happened several times over the course of the next like couple months, my understanding, and he really wanted to try to understand what you know how that was happening, and if there was some way of kind of measuring your body when that was happening. He had, I guess, the quite a bit of money and resources to put together an institute, and he was into like radio transmissions, so that was his area of expertise. And him and some engineers, and I don't know how the actual program got developed or designed, but they found that the way the brain receives frequencies is that each ear registers like its own frequency, and the brain is only allowed to pick up on certain hertz. I think like the most sensitive brain can pick up on like 20 hertz, but most people have the range around 40 hertz. But if you can get the brain to vibrate at, say, like 8 hertz or 10 hertz, you can induce really deep meditative states. You can induce states that allow you to remote view, to astral project, and do all of these out of body experiences is how they how they promote their program. And it's really using binaural beats, so each ear has its own different frequency, and they play with what levels go into each ear to elicit certain reactions. I went there trying to compare my DMT states with what states that they were claiming to induce just by listening to putting on a pair of headphones, going into deep meditation. And they were basically saying that you can leave your body and do all this crazy shit. So I went there almost to try to disprove them, or to almost kind of call bullshit, knowing that I had already seen and experienced a lot of what they were claiming. Like I've left my body. I've seen these other dimensions and realms. So I wasn't going there really to have that experience. I had already had those experiences. It was more, can they replicate what they're saying? And after spending a week there, and it's so 6 hours of 6 days of basically nonstop meditation, 8 to 10 hours of deep meditation a day, typically in total darkness, where they are putting different levels of vibrations, through headphones. And long story short, in my opinion, their program works. It really is able to induce and elevate that antenna like we were talking about. So, but now, for me to take a hit of DMT and you're instantly blasted there, now I can receive all this information. Or, you talk about monks going out into the mountains and meditating for 10 years or whatever, and then they're able to elevate their antenna to get this information. Basically, what Monroe is doing is they're forcing the change of your antenna by pulsing, those binaural beats. And they have different focus levels. So, one is really calming and you kind of sink within your body and it's really comfortable. Another one is highly energetic, and it kind of like separates your physical body from your spiritual body, and you really feel it like that. Like you can get that separation. And after a week of staying there and doing their programs, I wrote a short paper kind of combining or outlining what I thought the similarities were, and tying back to what we discussed when we first started the interview, which is there's multiple keys or multiple keys to unlock the human potential. There's multiple tools to use to let this body, vibrate to its fullest potential. And I found that there were quite a few similarities between what Monroe teaches and allows the human body to experience that is similar to psychedelics. And some of the take-home bullet points are just first, and this is their slogan, that we're more than our physical body. So anybody that's done a psychedelic experience, you're more than just this meat suit, and that there's something greater than. When you go through the Monroe experience, you know that for sure as well, because you're able to go through these deep meditations. You're also, in my opinion, you have no question that you're not alone on this planet, and that there are other beings and entities that you can interact with. So like we just discussed, and you had, like I said, David Brown on, who wrote a whole book about all these interactions. deep in these meditative states that Monroe induces, you also have access to these outside entities. And then you also feel the same kind of connection to source, to God, to, and again, whatever you want to put a term to it, the love and connection that their program kind of makes your body pulse with was also very similar to psychedelic. So, two completely different modalities. One's an external drug and the other one's just putting on a set of headphones. But what they both do is amplify and add on to the human antenna to allow for different information to come in and for you to have different experiences. And it was incredible. I definitely plan on going back. And they have many other programs to kind of hone in on it. The one I did was just the basic kind of prerequisite that you have to take. And the biggest take home, and again, is just to take the time for yourself. So to take a week off from work, to put your phone and computer down, to say I'm going to meditate for 8 hours a day in a dark bed and not be stressed about work and social media and all that shit. Where that alone, without even the binaural beats and without their program or without psychedelics, just to do that, I think could be transformational for a lot of people. Like no one ever does that. No one takes 6 days of consecutive 8-hour meditation sessions. But it was, and you don't need to go there to their institute to listen to it. You can get their CDs or programs, and there's multiple other companies that actually do the same thing. And it's just, again, put 100 hertz in one ear, 108 in the other, and your brain's registering that 8 hertz, and that 8 hertz can allow you to use your brain in other ways.
But did you have an out-of-body experience where you saw yourself floating or anything like that?
Not, and I wish I could claim to be like, yeah, I went there and had, no, I did not have the full-blown release like they've discussed and talked about. I had some really cool separations of my spiritual body and the separation of different aspects of my body. But in my opinion, the way they describe a true out-of-body experience is a very lucid, awake awareness that you are in a completely different location and you're there. Like it's a really shocking experience. And actually, my roommate there, when I was there, he was the only one of the group, and he did have on that last day an out-of-body experience. And the whole week we're all sharing all our stories. We're all kind of debriefing afterwards. We're all emotional. And so by the end of the week, all of our guards were down, and we were really comfortable with one another. When he woke up from that session, he looked like a ghost. He was talking like he couldn't compose himself. He was just like, "What the fuck, Adam? Like I had it. I really did it." And he talks about that story quite a bit, and it was amazing. It was terrifying for him because, again, like you can't just have an experience like that, come back to your day-to-day walking life and be like, "Oh yeah, that didn't happen." Like you can't really explain how it happened, but to try to explain that it didn't happen, that'll drive you nuts even more. But no, I guess what I did take away from that, similar to psychedelics, is an understanding of how refined my human body and my senses can be. And I share the story about how I drove there for that week. Typically, when I'm driving in the car and listening to the radio, I'm tapping on my steering wheel with 2 fingers, just typically the bass beat and maybe whatever a background part of the song, and you're just kind of thumbing along. When I left there, like an hour later, I realized my hands were so tired because I was beating with every one of my 10 digits to each one of like the aspects of the song, where now like I was picking up on every cadence, every beat, every instrument. The same song that I listened to on the way there was now processed in a completely different way, and my body was able to like innately and naturally respond to it. Like I wasn't trying to tap 10 fingers. It was just naturally happening now because that's how my body was receiving the music. Same thing like walking through the woods, where you now feel the wind on your skin in a more sensitive way. You hear every sound. Your smell is so much more kind of refined because you learn in these states just how amplified it can be.
Yeah. I've done Vipassana retreat one time for 7 days, and I could feel senses also were heightened, like smell. But it's interesting. I remember maybe 10, 15 years ago, I was experimenting with out-of-body experiences. Was something that I think was an out-of-body, but I heard about 3 different types of experience. So one is like a lucid dream, right? You're just conscious in the dream. The second is like a proper out-of-body experience, like you see yourself in bed, things like that, right? And the third one is like an out-of-body in the dream. I don't know if this is like anything you guys were taught, or this, I don't know, anything like that was explained. Because I remember there was some stuff from Monroe as well at that time when I was trying. But
I mean, I think there are levels to
yeah,
what that experience is. Some people say that they have the experience of being like a bird, being able to just fly over a city or something like that. But then some of them really are. No, you're standing in, like the gentleman I was just talking about. He said, I was just in a random room out a window, looking out the window, and I was there, like I was in that particular space. And like I said, the way we had just spent all week describing these mental meditations where we were, visualizing all these weird things. So that, we just spent a week doing mental visualizations. This was, in his, description, not that. This was really, and it's like I said, it scared the shit out of him too, because when he was coming back into his body, he felt that transition period when he was out and then getting back in, and it scared the shit out of him. He said he was like calling out for me, and I couldn't hear him, and I felt horrible. I was like, oh man, I wish I would have heard you. But yeah, I think I think lucid dreaming is, and anybody that's experienced that, I maybe that is a good opening to that, or a good kind of way of doing it with training wheels. But to know that, yeah, it's completely different from a regular dream. And if you can have kind of conscious control of how you interact in that space, it's like a whole another world where you can learn and interact and grow in. And I think that's a big part of the story too, is not just to brush it off as, oh, just a fun psychedelic trip, or, oh, that's just a lucid dream, or, oh yeah, he can have an out-of-body experience. What does that mean, and why are we having that? What's the information that we're supposed to be taking back from it? My big thing, it would be just that we are way greater than what we typically imagine ourselves to be. And if we all thought that, I think a lot of the world's ills would be corrected.
Yeah, and I think that all these things for a skeptic or a regular person, they sound so far out that they just don't want to even look into it because it just sounds ridiculous, whatever, right? Like, that seems to be the problem always. Like,
well, they're afraid what they're gonna hear. Like in myself, I was hiding behind financial success and the houses and the cars, and look how smart I am, and look what I've done. And if anybody would have held, or if anybody would have said to me the things that I said to myself when I was deep in these psychedelic states, I would have been angry, upset. I would have, it wouldn't have went well. Where for me to finally say it to myself was exactly what I needed. So, I think to have an appropriate caution when it comes to psychedelics, just about their power, and that you have to respect them from a chemical and compound standpoint, 100%. But there's also the other aspect of, are you willing to confront your demons? Are you willing to say, and this is where I think sometimes people are really scared too, where if the real honest answer, and the only people, like only the subjective individual knows this, like, should I get a divorce? Do I hate my job? Do I not like my kids? Do I need to move? Am I fat? Am I overweight? Am I alcoholic? Am I this, that? Like, there's so many things that, like, no one wants to hear, and it's so painful to hear from other people. But, like, for my case, I needed to hear from me, no, you're a mean jerk. You're again, a narcissistic asshole. You're a belligerent drunk. Like, all, and fuck, man, like, and I don't like saying these things about myself now because I'm such a different person. But a lot of people don't take accountability for where they are dark and ugly and nasty. So that's probably the scariest aspect of psychedelics is, fuck, people are going to have to be accountable. And it's not everybody else around them's the jerk that needs to change. It's like, well, maybe I'm the jerk that needs to change. And that can be really difficult, because that may mean you need to do some difficult things like get a new job, move, tell your long-term relationship to screw. Like, there's a lot of, but the option is keep banging your head against the wall, keep shoveling your problems under the rug until it explodes, like what happened to me, which was it got to the point where it was just so bad where I didn't even want to be here anymore. So that ultimately is what, the goal of trying to prevent this is don't push it under the rug until you actually explode. Look into it. It will be hard. It will be difficult, but being a drunk jerk for 10 years is more difficult than a couple years of psychedelic work.
The guy who runs Rhythmia in Costa Rica, it's a ayahuasca retreat place, very famous, big one. I think his name is Jerry, whatever. Like, there is a documentary about him. So he was saying very similar story. Like, he claimed that he was extremely successful financially in the US. Like, he was a multi-millionaire, but rotten inside. Like, he said he was just basically drugs, parties, hookers, whatever, all the time, and felt like, he was just destroyed. And he did an ayahuasca, and he claimed that the moon talked to him, and showed him like some kind of scene from childhood where he was abused as a child. And so it was kind of like this work with your trauma in the childhood, where maybe the results of him abusing himself as an adult resulted from some of these experiences in childhood. This is often like that. But apparently he claimed that he got healed himself like this after one session from addictions and his issues. And what apparently the moon told him during the session was that he has to use his money to start an ayahuasca retreat, and that's what he did. So he actually established one of the biggest ayahuasca retreat places in Costa Rica, which is like, really known. A lot of famous people go there, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I got invited one time, but I didn't go because I got my, first of all, ayahuasca stories that I wasn't very keen to repeat. But also, I don't know. I don't think you can run the place like a business, because it seems to be, from what I'm hearing, is a little bit like that. It's like expensive. They do sessions with 100 people or 80 people. Like, one night is like few $100s, whatever. Graham Hancock goes there, whatever, like some famous people. And I don't know. It seems to me like you cannot mix a business with such experience in a good way, because if you optimize everything for more is better, this is not the right thing to do, something like that. But I don't have enough knowledge to properly judge.
This would be a good maybe segue or a good opportunity to mention also one of the reasons why I wrote the book. And again, not telling anybody what to do, and this is, the whole topic of psychedelics is you have to use, your discretion here. But I have a chapter in my book called Grandma's Recipes, where I go over recipes on how to make your own ayahuasca and how to make DMT, because it's a very, very simple extraction process. So, and that was kind of part of sharing my story too, was that you don't need to spend $2,000-$3,000 and go away to another country and go out in the middle of the woods with a bunch of strangers. You can literally buy, $100 worth of bark material, mulch material, and brew your own tea. And ayahuasca really is just a simple brewing process. And there's multiple online companies that send product all throughout the world, including the US, where you can legally buy, like Mimosa hostilis is the most common plant. You can legally buy and ship that all over the country. The actual 2 ingredients that you use to make traditional ayahuasca, again, you can buy those separately online and have them mailed. And again, not telling anybody what to do, but if this medicine calls to you and it's something that, you're getting the call to, it's just part of my story was that it is natural, it is organic, it is naturally produced in your own body, and it is something that is accessible. It's not something that you have to, again, save thousands of dollars and spend a whole week doing something. So that was another aspect of my book that I wanted to get out there, was that and because I don't want to, you don't want to go to shady drug dealers. You're not trying to and you don't, especially now, you don't know what's in your product. So even that process of making your own ayahuasca or making your own medicine, to know that you started it from the beginning process to the end, it's pure, it's infused with good intention, you can make a ceremony out of the actual process itself. And I found that to be maybe a big part of why I've had so much therapy and healing from it too, because it's, I'm getting it from the plant and the whole process through putting my intention into it.
I think it's good to mention that, it's important to, when you start experimenting with anything on your own, it's good to have someone more experienced to, as a sitter, or guide you or help you, or even just to be with you, who's sober or whatever. Because just to kind of make it safer, right? You've been brave, and you are the guy who just is not afraid to experiment with yourself, do everything yourself. But I think it's always better for people to do little steps, even if it's not gonna work out first time. It's fine. At least that you're safe and everything is okay, and the second time's gonna work out, and things like that. So I
agree with those 2 points. You have 2 points of go into it slowly and don't try to go for that massive breakthrough the first time, and the importance of having someone with you, especially the first dozen times. My first DMT session, I was with a very close friend who I consider a brother, who did nothing but just be there and truly just hold space. It wasn't like he was rubbing my shoulders or giving me water or throwing a blanket on me. He wasn't saying anything. He wasn't trying to interpret the information. It's really just, to your point, to know that you're safe, to know that somebody's there to have your back. I agree that that's part of setting and part of the environment and intention, which is have somebody that and trust to help you through it. Because it, as much as we kind of talk, well, we've done this many times and walk out to the woods, and I've done hundreds, it's mind blowing every time, and it's not something to take lightly. And really, is, like I said, every time I go to do it, it's still nervous, it's still nerve wracking. I get us all the time. Is it easy? Is it fun? Could you get addicted to it? It's no, it's none of those things. It's fucking terrifying. You get a lot of good information about yourself though from it, and to me, that's the information that I gain in those spaces are, right now, I don't want to say the most important things that I'm able to tap into, but I've done the 8 years of college. I've read the thousands of books. I've listened to the dozens of podcasts. Even I listened to your story. You've listened to all the documentaries and the movies and all that shit. But until you experience it, until you actually feel your body vibrating at these levels, until you've talked with truly the devil as well as God, it's until you've done those things personally, it's tough to even imagine what we're talking about. Yeah. But they're there for the brave soul.
Yeah,
they're, like Terrence McKenna used to say, 3 tokes away and you can be there.
It's funny because I had same levels of very anxious before every session, and before my last session I was like, the worst is always behind me. I already done, I had such a hardcore situations that nothing can beat whatever happened before and stuff like that. And I just learned that it was even worse.
But you came through it. I know it was difficult, but you came through it, you survived, you got that badge. And I would also say this, you wouldn't be tested and you wouldn't be shown such a darkness if you weren't such a light. You know what I mean? That. So, and the fact that you were able to combat it and win and your energy bubble or your resonant whatever pushed that away, I think is a clear testament to again your power, and that wouldn't have confronted you unless it thought you were a threat. And the fact that you said fuck you and you won is, I don't know, again, I would wear that as a badge of honor.
Yeah, no, I feel...
Not to say you want to go through that battle again, but you've
Yeah, it was a biggest test, I guess, of my life, because I compared
and
it.
this coming from a fighter, like this coming from a guy that trained to fight, right?
Yeah, like if you think about like beating people, it's not even 1% of like how scared you are in such scenario.
But for the, and I don't want to say like the tough guy military person, but that's where I think psychedelics can help a lot of the war veterans, or a lot of the, like my case, the quote like alpha male business guy who can't show any weaknesses, or like it forces you to do the biggest battle, which is with yourself and with the darker aspects. But because I guess my point was it's easy to go into a ring and get in a fight. It's easy to go into an office and do battle with your coworker. But it's really hard to go into a dark room and be quiet and do battle with yourself. But to me, that's the fight that most people, gain gain the most from actually doing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we're kind of going 2 hours already.
Pushing.
I could go longer, but I feel like people, the attention span is always weak these days.
Well, I'm here. I'm available. I know actually I was looking through some of your podcasts. You've interviewed Brandon Thomas. I don't know if you remember that gentleman. He's one of my closest friends. I love that guy. I'm also friends with Chris Matthew. You did an interview with him. So, we're all kind of exploring the same topics with the same type of rawness and filter. So, I'm here. I'm available. I'm certainly not going anywhere. And I do also want to, if I could, a lot of, and most of the podcasts that I do, I kind of offer this, where a big part of my story is, yes, exposure to DMT and what it is, and a brief outline of what that is. But really the purpose of the book was about mental health and about helping people that may be in as dark of a spot as that I was. So, if any of my story resonates, and if anybody wants a copy of the book, I offer a free PDF copy. If anybody just send me an email, I'll happily send a book. I'm not trying to make bucks off of this. It really is share the message. So I'm accessible. If anybody wants a copy, they can certainly get it. And again, it's about sharing the message, not about promoting anything in particular.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Is there anything you wanted to mention before we're gonna close?
I guess end it with 2 comments. I'll end it with how I ended my book, which is love thy neighbor, which is, it's crazy to come full circle from I used to hate myself and hate society and hate everybody, to having this immense sense of self-love and self-knowledge, but then that extends to everybody else, and to really, I do love my neighbors and love the community, but also, to be that neighbor for people to lean on. So, to keep your eyes open for it. If you have somebody in your inner circle, and most people do, whether it's immediate family or close friends that do have mental health issues, or are potentially suicidal, or, are really walking around in a funk, go up to them, ask them if they need anything, give them a hug, tell them that you love them, and, a warm embrace and a hug and a genuine interaction with somebody can truly be what they need to stay on this planet. So that would be my message is, man, if you're in a good spot and you're full of light and good energy, share it with the people that don't have that, because you're sitting on a really valuable asset. And now that's my biggest kind of contribution is I've absorbed so much shit and so much darkness and so much nastiness that I think my job is to just take all that crap in and give out light and love. And again, that would be my message, is be that strength for other people, because you never know when you may need it.
No, that's a beautiful way to close the conversation. Thank you, Adam. Thanks for sharing your story. And I'm going to definitely include the links to your book in the description. And hope we can catch up other time, maybe invite some other psychonauts and have more conversations. It was great to talk to you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. I'm honored to be a part of your show.
Thank you. Okay, cool.